My marriage just ended. Have you ever heard of a business owner whose primary motivation for selling his company was his unwillingness to cheat on his wife? Now you've heard because that's exactly what I, Brent Voorhees, did. It wasn't the only reason, but it was my primary reason. My business entered the proverbial conversation as a garage startup. I had a degree in biomedical engineering, and after college I worked for a large firm. The work was not rewarding. In my spare time, I became interested in rapid test kits for various diseases that would allow consumers to inexpensively test themselves at home to see if a more complex follow-up test was worthwhile. Without going into details that are irrelevant to this story, I wanted the tests to avoid false negatives when used twice 2 days apart. Up to 10% false positives would be acceptable if consumers were aware of this fact. While working in my garage, I first developed a test kit for babesiosis, a relatively obscure tick-borne disease. I sold the patent rights to it to a national testing laboratory. After that, I started working on other test kits, and by the time of my third test kit, even though I was in debt because of all the capital I had borrowed to prove the efficacy of my kits, I felt confident enough to go out on my own and start Resikit Inc. By the time I turned 43, Resikit was making a huge amount of money. It had over 250 employees and was looking to be acquired by several different biomedical and pharmaceutical companies. It was at that time that I started getting interested in sales. By the time I turned 36, I had divorced my first wife. Kathy and I married a year after graduating from college, and she was with me during the creation of the first test kits. My working long hours and going into debt to start the business certainly didn't improve my marital situation, but what ruined it was the fact that I was cheating. My cheating was the result of the classic entitlement attitude I developed when I sold my second patent rights to the test kit. My mistress Sophia was young, impressionable, and thought I was a damn sexy person. However, after 3 encounters with her, I pulled my head out of my ass and cut it off. Unfortunately, she didn't take our breakup very well and told Katie about my affairs. When Katie confronted me face to face, I didn't lie, even though Sophia had no real proof. By then, I felt bad enough not to compound my sins with lies. Confession may have done my soul good, but it ended my marriage. Thankfully, we didn't have children. I thought I felt as bad as I could feel until I found out that 183 days, not that I was counting, before the divorce decree officially went into effect, Kathy had cheated on me too, and not just the 3 times I had. While the divorce proceedings didn't have a significant negative impact on my business or financial situation, mainly because I was up to my eyeballs in debt, and Kathy didn't believe my efforts would ultimately succeed, it almost killed me emotionally. I married my second wife Brenda when I was 38, at a time when Resikit was starting to show great promise. I hired a good lawyer, and Brenda and I signed a prenuptial agreement. I insisted that the prenup include a mutual ethics clause as an added incentive, as if I needed one to remain faithful. Before I married Brenda, or before we signed the prenup, I was completely honest with Brenda and told her about my past marital infidelity and how much I regretted it. She seemed happy with the morals clause. The prenup also provided that she would receive nothing from Resikit, whether stock or sale proceeds, regardless of the reason for the divorce, and I would receive no part of the money she brought into the marriage. She was quite wealthy. The penalties for violating the morals clause were significant. My problems began when Resikit was in the midst of its best growth, around the time I turned 40. There was a need to hire an experienced full-time HR person, so I asked the current part-time employee, who was being transferred to another department, which he was happy about, to select resumes and let me interview the top 4. The first interviewee was Gail Preston, a 155-centimeter tall woman in 12-centimeter high heels who weighed about 50 pounds. Translating her personality and ability to charm to size, her height would be over 2 meters and her weight 150 kilograms. She had been married for 6 years, was 35 years old, and had an impressive background in education and work. However, I hardly paid attention to these facts. There was something about the way she held herself, the way she postured while talking, the way she flicked her shiny brown hair off her shoulders, and the way she pursed her lips that was simply adorable. By the time she left the interview after exchanging a firm and sensual handshake an hour later, I was covered in sweat and had an uncomfortable feeling. I knew immediately that it would be dangerous to be around this woman, but it would be unfair to her to disregard her just because she was as sultry as an endless tropical vacation. So I made up my mind. That is, I called my two vice presidents and said, "Jim and Judy, I've decided it would be best to distance myself from the hiring process for the Director of Human Resources. Here are 4 resumes of the most qualified candidates. You two make the decision. If a tiebreaker is needed, we'll have Ken choose between the last 2. "I thought you were just talking to that little lighter who slipped out of your office a half hour ago," Judy replied with a puzzled look. "Yes, she's one of the top 4. However, based on that interview, I decided that someone else should make the decision, and I've assigned you 2. So call her and ask her to come in for another interview with the other 3, I muttered back as the uncomfortable feeling in my lower abdomen intensified. Judy and Jim shrugged, said, "Okay," and leisurely walked out of my office. I immediately went to the gym and worked out to the point of exhaustion. I hope they don't pick her, I muttered to myself at least a dozen times while doing various exercises or watching TV on the elliptical machine. A week later, Judy and Jim walked into my office first thing in the morning. "We both agree that Gail Preston is by far the best candidate," Judy announced. "She starts work a week from Monday. We're giving her the office across the hall from yours," Jim added. I swallowed hard, put on a fake smile, and said, "Great." It was as bad as I'd feared. I had to interact with Gail, or at least see her every workday when I was in town. Since our office was a very friendly environment, we often had parties, picnics, meetings, retreats, and other events outside of work, where, thankfully, we socialized with our spouses most of the time. Gail seemed to be happily married to her husband John, a stockbroker. Brenda never seemed to treat Gail as warmly as most of the other management staff, even though, as far as I could tell, Gail was always friendly at these events. At the holiday party, after Gail had worked there for about 2 years, somehow it happened that Gail and I danced together while John and Brenda danced together. When the fast song changed to a slow song and Gail slipped one of her matchless thighs between my legs, disaster struck. Not only did I become hard as a rock, but while Gail chatted nonstop, not that she was resting her head on my shoulder, I spontaneously enjoyed myself. It was the first time that had ever happened in my life. On the way home that night, Brenda wasn't herself. After that night, I started to think about Gail damn near putting me into a comatose state. I'd spent too much time without sleep thinking about her, and when I saw her ass strutting down the hallway at work, I almost had another spontaneous cringe. It was then that I decided that for the good of my marriage and for my self-esteem, given my promise to never cheat again, I needed to break up with Gail. By the time of my ill-fated dance with Gail, I had several serious inquiries from biomedical and pharmaceutical companies trying to buy Resicate. We had a substantial portfolio of valuable patents covering virtually every aspect of our 31 commercial products, and even more promising products were in development. In addition, I had clearly accumulated more money than I could ever use, and I was impressed by the philanthropic approach of famous people like Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett. So I wanted to work for the public good, rather than my own personal wealth. I had almost convinced myself that this second reason, dedication to philanthropy, was the main reason I wanted to sell. However, in those moments when I thought of Gail making love to Brenda, I had to admit to myself what the real primary reason was. When I invited bidders to sell Resicate, I involved the 6 most senior members of the management team, including Gail, in the process. Gail expressed concern to me about the situation, as she seemed to be convinced that she was not the most indispensable member of the team and did not think she could find a financially suitable alternative position. I advised her not to worry, but also tried my best not to stare at her thighs as she sat across my desk, cross-legged and with her skirt up. In the end, I sold the company to the 3rd of the 8 buyers who offered the highest price. All of the offers were so obscenely high that financially it made no practical difference to me which one I chose, because I deemed them suitable, and because they were not reluctant to offer Jim and Judy 2 options. Jim's employment contracts were for 1 year and Gail's for 5 years. I had personally sworn these three to secrecy regarding their contracts. There were tears in Gail's eyes, and despite my hesitation, she rushed to me and hugged me tightly around the neck, kissing my cheek with tears in her eyes. Obeying her completely childish reaction, I didn't wash her dried tears off my cheek for 2 days. After I left Resikit, which is now a division of Megabucks Pharmaceuticals, Gail kept in touch with me and invited me to lunch several times. I tried to turn all these invitations into events with our spouses and usually succeeded, although I got the impression that Gail was sometimes annoyed by my attitude. During these outings, I felt a chasm forming between Gail and John, and Brenda usually became more reserved over the next few days. Eventually, I started making excuses not to go out with Gail. I dove headfirst into my charity work and really enjoyed life, although my earlier infatuation with Gail hadn't diminished much. I was away from Resikit for almost 2 years and didn't return Gail's last calls when it was time for the annual year-end party. As a separate division of Megabucks, Resikit still held its own social events. Of course, as the previous owner, I was invited. I called the person in charge of the event and asked if Gail and John would be coming. I was assured that they would not be coming, which allowed me to agree. Of course, I wanted Brenda to come with me to the party on Friday night, but she declined, saying she had a business trip that would make it impossible for her to return until Saturday morning. Brenda continued to work because she enjoyed it. We didn't need the money, of course. When I got to the hotel where the party was being held, almost everyone in attendance greeted me with enthusiasm. All the employees seemed grateful that I had sold Megabucks, which apparently was a good employer, and were pleased with the $10,000 bonuses I gave each of them as I left. Then, contrary to what I was told, I saw Gail there. When she saw me, she came over with fire in her eyes. "Why have you been avoiding me, Brent Voorhees? I thought you liked me, and you certainly took care of me when you left by giving me a 5-year labor contract," she reprimanded, jabbing her index finger at my chest. I noticed that her words sounded a little slurred. Gail rarely drank more than a glass of wine at a time, but that night she seemed almost drunk. Well, I haven't, avoiding you, Gail. I've just been really busy," I stammered, already starting to sweat. Where's John?" I continued, hoping to change the subject. "He's not here, and don't try to sneak out. I know you've been avoiding me, and by the end of the evening, I'll know why. Now dance with me," she commanded. Gail and I danced 5 or 6 dances together, including one excruciatingly slow one, before I convinced her that I needed to talk to the unit manager and his wife, as well as the other employees brought in by Megabucks. Only on the condition that we meet for drinks in the hotel bar after the party is over and discuss a few things. Sure," I mumbled. Before I spoke to the department manager, I called Brenda's cell phone and got to voicemail. I left a message. My hope that Gail wouldn't find me when the party was over turned out to be false. She grabbed my hand and dragged me to the bar before the last number of the band. We found a secluded dark table at the back of the bar and ordered drinks. She, a cherry girl, and me, a Virgin Mary. Gail didn't really need a drink because for the first time in the time I'd known her, she was drunk, or close to it. However, I wasn't going to suggest she order a soda. I just smiled and prepared myself for what was about to happen. I removed all unintelligible language from her conversation. "So, Brent, let me be blunt. I think you've been avoiding me because you really like me. Admit it." "Why do you think that, Gail?" "Because you've always been very nice to me, but at the same time you've been wary. When we dance, you're as hard as a rock and you can't help but stare at my thighs, though I can't understand why. There's nothing special about them," she rebuked, followed by a burp and a giggle. "Well, I like you, but I don't think I have a thing for you," I started to reply before she blurted out, "Bullshit." "Admit it! You have a thing for me!" she snapped, glaring at me fiercely. "If you don't admit it, I'll sit on your lap," she grinned. Well, you're sexy. I think most guys would be into you," I replied, taking off my tie. The collar was really getting tight. "No, they wouldn't. I have breasts that barely fit in a cup, not huge breasts like most girls," she parried. Listen, Gail," I muttered. This was ignored. "Besides, my ass is too big. I look like a Gottentot and my buttocks stick out so much," she giggled. In fact, in my opinion, she had a perfectly round ass. And why are you staring at my thighs like that? They're too big. They were too muscular when I was skating and skiing, she continued, before jumping up and giggling again just as our drinks arrived. Truth be told, Gail's thighs are world class. While they are certainly muscular, there is something sexy about them, not vulgar. After a couple sips of Cherry Girl, Gail continued, Plus, I'm hard to live with. I have a high libido, and when I want love, I don't take no for an answer. And woe betide John if he's not in the mood, she snorted. She proceeded to list all of her supposed faults. She snored, was grumpy in the morning, etc., etc. I accompanied each statement with an inarticulate each of which was ignored. After a good 45 minutes of her berating me about myself for the obvious purpose of telling me that I should in no way have feelings for her and that we should just be friends, she actually just intrigued me even more. She was a real person, in addition to being a goddess. As soon as Gail finished her second helping of Cherry Girl, her eyes glazed over. I gently took her hand, looked into her poorly focused eyes, and asked, Gail, are you okay? You look like you're about to faint. I'm a little out of it, she giggled, still looking glassy-eyed. Let me call you a cab, I continued. I'm staying at the hotel for the night, she replied, running her hand into her clutch, and after much searching, including scattering some of the makeup I'd picked out for her, she pulled out a key card and waved it in front of me. What room are you in? I'll help you upstairs. Shit, I can't remember. It must have been on the 16th floor, maybe the 17th. I think it's 1705, she muttered. Let's go to the front desk, I replied, helping her up and pushing her toward the front desk as she clung to me to keep from falling. When we got to the front desk, I handed the receptionist her key card and my driver's license. The girl was wearing a name tag that said Madeline. Madeline, my friend Gail Preston says she's registered at your hotel but can't remember her room number. Here's her key card. Could you tell me what room she's in? I offered. Well, I'm not sure if I should... Madeline started to answer, clearly noticing Gail's intoxication. Look, the reason I handed you my driver's license is because you're going to record information from it to make sure I don't do anything to Mrs. Preston. I'll just put her to bed and leave a note for the maid not to wake her up. If she's late with the hour of reckoning, I'll pay for the overrun, I continued in my most persuasive tone. I could see that Madeline was still unsure, so I continued. Please consult with the manager, Madeline. I don't want to get you in trouble, but Mrs. Preston needs help. Madeline did go out to the back room and returned 2 minutes later with a wide smile. The manager says it's all right. I'll make a photocopy of your driver's license and then check her room number on the key card. After making a photocopy of my license, surprised by Gail's giggles as she clutched at my chest and arms, Madeline ran the key card through the typewriter on her desk, wrote the room number on a piece of paper, and handed it to me. 1825, the note read. At least she got the first and last of the 4 digits right, I chuckled to myself as I led Gail to the elevator. Gail was very talkative, though little of what she said made sense as I literally carried her to the elevator and from the elevator to her room. When I opened the door to her room, she kissed me on the cheek and said, Thank you, Brent. I need you to take my dress off and hang it up. If I sleep in it, it will be ruined. I didn't think that was a good idea, but I didn't know how to avoid it. I unzipped her tight dress, and as it fell to the floor, I realized it had a bra built into it. The only clothes left on her after the dress fell off were a thong and shoes with 10-inch heels. Her now fully exposed thighs were even above world class, if that was even possible, and her ass was as perfect as it looked when she was clothed. I helped Gail onto the bed, then took the shoes off her sexy feet, put the shoes away in the closet in her room, and hung up her dress. I then threw her legs up on the bed and pulled the blanket over her delightful body, after which I got another good look at her delightful body. As I tucked Gail in and pulled away, she grabbed me by the lapel of my jacket, pulled my head to her, and captured a hot kiss on my lips. Letting go of me, she said, "Thank you," and rolled over onto her other side. By the time I turned out the light and left her room, she was, as promised in her denunciation speech at the bar, snoring. Brenda arrived at our house around 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. After we exchanged careless kisses and she asked about the party and I asked about her business trip, she said she needed a shower. She put her iPhone and purse on the kitchen table and took her suitcase to the laundry room before heading upstairs. Sitting in the kitchen with a glass of orange juice, I felt a little guilty, even though I hadn't really done anything wrong, and felt even more awkward about my concern for Gail when my cell phone rang. I really thought it was my cell phone. I got up and walked over to the counter where Brenda and I had our identical iPhones lying around. Honestly, it was pure coincidence that I saw the message on what turned out to be Brenda's cell phone. "You're my best girlfriend for love in the world," followed by a devilishly smiling emoji and the signature Bill. Bill Benson was the guy Brenda worked with and who had probably been with her on her business trip for the past few days. I collapsed into the nearest chair. My head was all jumbled up, but I calmed down and was mostly sane by the time Brenda came back into the kitchen in her robe and with her hair still damp from her shower. "Why do you look like your dog just died?" she asked half-jokingly when she saw me. I looked at her without a smile and replied, "Because my marriage just ended." She looked surprised. Holding out my iPhone to her, I said, "Check your last message." She pressed a few buttons and then covered her face with her hand. "How long has your affair with Bill lasted?" I growled. Her expression changed from amazed to stiff. "About 1/10 as long as your affair with Gail Preston," she grinned. "I never had a love affair with Gail," I snapped back. "Maybe not, but you've had an emotional affair with her since the day you met her," Brenda snapped back. "How did you come up with that?" I asked, and my voice trembled slightly as I couldn't deny the emotional connection, even though I did everything in my power to keep it from turning physical. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's the funny look on your face when you're around her. Maybe it was because of the spontaneous pleasure in your pants when you slow danced with her. How she realized it, I have no idea." "You must have screamed her name at night, and even twice when you slept with me, you bastard," she growled. The last remark surprised me, but I couldn't deny it. Maybe it was. "And that gives you the right to make love to Bill Benson for the last 5, 6, how many months?" I yelled. "I needed a contingency plan in case you left me when your emotional connection turned physical," Brenda replied, this time with a sad expression on her face, tears in her eyes, and her arms crossed over her chest. We stared at each other in silence for what seemed to me like half an hour, but was really only a couple minutes. Finally, I got up from my chair and said, "Why don't you come home early Monday afternoon so I can hand you the papers here instead of at your office? I won't try to force a morals clause on you in the prenuptial agreement." I went up to my bedroom, gathered the clothes and supplies I would need for the next few days, put them in my suitcase, and headed out the door. Before I walked out, Brenda sobbed, "That's it?" Without turning around to look at her, I replied, "Yes, that's it. Since this is my house, you'll have to leave within the next month, as stipulated in the prenup." And I walked out the door, not bothering to close the door behind me. Brenda didn't try to make up. It wouldn't have led to anything good, though, because I was in no mood to reconcile. She signed the settlement papers a few days after she was served with the divorce papers because the prenup was very clear about what was going to happen, and I didn't invoke the morals clause, even though she knew I could have. I stayed in our beach house for the next month until she vacated what used to be our country house. She took very little with her that she wasn't entitled to. That Monday evening after Brenda had been served, I received a call from Gail. I decided to take the call. After a brief exchange of hi, she got right to the point. "I'm sorry, Brent, if I was rude to you on Friday at the party. That's no excuse, though. I was drunk for the first time since college, and I wanted to say what was on my mind." "I get it, Gail. You didn't do anything wrong. I also want to thank you for dragging my drunk ass to my room, but how come I ended up in my underwear? You demanded I take your dress off so you wouldn't ruin it by falling asleep in it and hang it in the closet," I grinned back. "That sounds like me," she grinned back. "Did you get a good look at me?" "Yes, of course," I grinned again. "Was it as disgusting as I told you it would be?" She replied, grinning again. "Actually, you're Aphrodite," I replied after a long pause, and then quickly continued, "But let's not talk about that anymore." "I agree. I called about something else," Gail said without any levity. "What was it?" I asked. "Brenda called me later that evening. She reprimanded me, called me a siren instead of the fire department. She had no right to go off on you. You didn't do anything wrong. You can't help it that you're so damn passionate, I replied, also without any levity. Are you really divorcing her? Yes, I'm divorcing her. I can't stand cheating. My infatuation with you wasn't cheating, but her fucking her coworker was cheating. Look, but I can't talk about this with you or anyone else. I'm gonna take a long time out. I wish you the best, I said, starting to choke. I understand. Good luck, Brent. And who knows, maybe we'll meet again when circumstances change, she said with irritation in her voice. Maybe, I replied, hitting the disconnect button on my cell phone. I wasn't as calm and collected about my divorce as I had initially seemed to those around me. While I had to admit to myself that my infatuation with Gail could have been construed as an emotional connection, I genuinely felt that I deserved credit for everything I had done to eliminate the possibility of it escalating into physical intimacy, and I resented Brenda for equating my emotional connection with her physical one. She could have ended our marriage before even sleeping with Bill if Gail bothered her that much. This situation also made me think of the disgust that still remained deep within me after I found out long after my divorce that my first wife, Kathy, had cheated on me, yet played the martyr during our divorce. I needed to do something dramatic to get over both of my unfaithful wives. However, my upbringing and philosophy on how women should be treated prevented me from getting revenge on Kathy and Brenda. However, Bill and Kathy's love buddy Winston, whom she later married, was a different story. Since I had unlimited monetary resources, I knew I could get revenge on them without ever being held accountable. For the next month, all I did was work with the main charitable organization I had founded and assign 2 teams of private investigators to find out everything they could about Bill and Winston. I also commissioned another organization with a dubious reputation to research possible revenge scenarios. After 30 days, I received reports from all 3 organizations. Bill and Winston had one thing in common. They loved their cars. In addition, Bill often took his favorite chariot out of town, and Winston went to a disadvantaged area of town about once every 2 weeks. I hired a hacker to find their auto insurance information and then canceled their policies a few days after finding out their addresses. Then, when the policy cancellation notices were received about a month before, when Bill's car was out of town and Winston's car was in a disadvantaged part of town, I removed 2 tires from each car in Denver. At the same time, I treated the trunks and interiors of the cars with butyric acid, one of the most disgusting-smelling substances known to man. However, I wasn't done with these 2 assholes yet. The next phase would also affect Kathy and Brenda, but by then I had decided that for now I wouldn't hurt them physically or financially. That would be too bad. I hired some not-so-noble gentlemen to break into the house that Kathy and Winston owned and Bill's condo, where Brenda often spent the night, and treated the mattresses in the master bedroom so that any significant activity on the beds, other than normal sleep movements, would trigger a noise generator hidden in ducts in other parts of the house or condominium. Each dwelling had several different noise generators with different sounds, and the computer chips switched between them for different activations of the bed sensors. I hoped that every time these cheating bastards made love in their bedrooms, the unpleasant and disturbing sounds would echo in other parts of the dwelling, resulting in the interruption of their infatuation. Since everything was wireless and the sound generators well hidden, I hoped it would be months before everything could be destroyed. Once my revenge was complete, I traveled to Aruba to spend a month there, trying my best to forget about my marriages and maybe even my concern for Gail. I had been in Aruba for about 10 days when I walked into the lobby of my luxury hotel after kayaking. In front of me, blocking my path, popped out a cocky little firecracker who looked just like Gail Preston. Luckily, you're easy to find, Brent. I only had to spend about $1,000 to find you, came a voice I knew well from behind oversized sunglasses and a hat. Gail? Was my reasonable question. In the flesh, she smiled. What are you doing here? Was my stupid question. Looking for you, of course. We need to talk. Where's your room? Well, okay. It's one of the penthouses, I mumbled. Awesome, she grinned, grabbing my hand and heading for the elevators. We chatted about the weather, the hotel, and the nature of Aruba until we entered my room. You need to sit down, Gail barked, pushing me onto one of the many couches in the penthouse hallway while she remained standing. Taking off her sunglasses and hat, she began to undress. John filed for divorce about 3 weeks ago, was her opening statement. Why? I asked, and that news, and Gail's gorgeous body, already had me perking up. He said he was tired of my emotional connection and wanted out. Emotional connection to who? I asked, genuinely perplexed. With you, asshole, she growled. Who the hell do you think it was with? Gail stood with her arms at her sides, a grin on her lips. My mind was having a hard time comprehending the situation. While I was still dizzy and my face was flaming, she finally muttered, Well, are you going to do something about it? Or are you just going to sit there with that fucked up look on your face? After hesitating for a few more seconds, I hopped off the bed, picked her up in my arms, and captured on her lips the most scalding French kiss I'd ever given in my life. Pulling away from her, I carried her into the bedroom. She was already tearing up both her top and mine as I carried her. All of her clothes were off within 10 seconds of her collapsing onto the mattress. After we had both made love several dozen times with an intensity I could in no way expect from her. As we lay side by side, exchanging quick, light kisses, smug smiles were on our faces. You didn't disappoint me, boy. That was amazing, she grinned. You're even better in real life than in my dreams, I laughed. And I didn't think it was possible. I'll tell you what, Eros, she continued. Why don't we spend the next 2 weeks just having fun, surfing, dancing, eating, and of course making love to the point of insanity, and then have a serious talk? Can you give up megabucks for 2 weeks? I asked. I've already quit. It's not a problem, she grinned. You quit? I asked. Hell yeah. I think there's a handsome, charming, rich guy out there somewhere who would love more than anything to support and spoil me. And guess what? I suggest you be the first to apply for the job, she parried with a devilish grin. Our conversation after 2 weeks didn't matter much. By then, we had both realized that our infatuation with each other was real, and even if we couldn't make love 3 times a day when we returned to the real world, we were completely compatible. We married 3 months after Gail's divorce was finalized. Less than 2 months later, she was pregnant with twins. Now we are both loving parents who make time for mind-blowing lovemaking with each other at least 5 times a week, and I have never once fantasized about anyone but my goddess wife. The end.